Sorry, we're not. It's going to look bad.
It's going to look bad? No, it won't look bad. So, what we're going to do here is, shall we let Mark do his thing or not?
Yes,
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
Give us a shortened version, Bud, please.
So, thank you. The report before you was on Plan Change 13 on heritage, and the decision is to withdraw some provisions of the plan change. Just as some context, Plan Change 13 was notified on the 17th of March 2023 alongside Plan Change 14. The scope of Plan Change 13 is in respect of a number of matters, including residential heritage areas, additions and changes to the schedule in the district plan of protected buildings and items, as well as changes to the policies and rules that apply to scheduled heritage items and residential heritage areas. The majority of Plan Change 13 has been duplicated in Plan Change 14, recognising that heritage was proposed as a qualifying matter to restrict development in some areas where intensification was inappropriate. Parts of Plan Change 13, however, are outside the scope of Plan Change 14, including the geographic coverage, an example being Banks Peninsula, which Plan Change 14 generally didn't touch, but Plan Change 13 does make amendments for. The scope also of Plan Change 13 is wider in including such matters as protection of interior of historic buildings. Ultimately, Plan Change 13 served as a backup should the IHP on Plan Change 14 deem that heritage matters were outside the scope of 14. In that context, residential heritage areas were a key component of Plan Change 14, and the panel on that recommended deletion of residential heritage areas because of the High Court precedents that determined that it was inappropriate to introduce rules through Plan Change 14 that were more restrictive than the status quo. The IHP did make it clear, though, that they expected that the RHAs would be tested further through Plan Change 13. Notwithstanding the point that the panel made about scope, they did come to some conclusions on the merits of RHAs, noting that the areas, in their view, didn't have heritage value, that the areas conflate character and heritage, and that the proposed rules are a significant imposition on landowners. Ultimately, the IHP only had Plan Change 14 before it and not Plan Change 13, so the panel on Plan Change 14 couldn't consider all the information before that was on the table for Plan Change 13. The original, the report that staff have prepared and is on the agenda has, for residential heritage areas, it has 4 sub-options under recommendation 4. Those sub-options are detailed on the slide here, being 4A to withdraw all 11 residential heritage areas, and recommendation 5 then listed the provisions that should be withdrawn as a consequence. Recommendation 4B was to refine the rules by removing additional controls on sites adjoining RHAs and some of the rules controlling scale and bulk. The consequence of that recommendation would be that Recommendation 6 is passed. Recommendation 4C was to withdraw those RHAs decided on in Plan Change 14, meaning that Recommendation 7 is carried. And Recommendation 4D was to continue with Plan Change 13 unchanged. As will be shown to you shortly, there's been some simplification of the recommendations in light of alternatives we're aware of, and we'll come on to show those to you shortly. In the meantime, the considerations in making your decision to help on the screen there. So there may be a view that RHAs have been tested through Plan Change 14 and don't have merit across the city. An alternative, similarly, the view may be that the provisions of RHAs need to be refined in order to pursue them further. You may have a view that RHAs across the city could still be considered through Plan Change 13 despite the decisions of Council on Plan Change 14. Another view may be that RHAs are, in broad terms, worthy of protection and should be still retested, and that the IHP didn't have scope in the best way forward is Plan Change 13. Alternatively, you may have the view the RHAs in Policy 3 areas have been decided that they shouldn't be revisited and therefore should only be pursued outside Policy 3 areas. Or you may have the view that our council has decided on RHAs in Policy 3 areas, and as a consequence, RHAs should be withdrawn from PC 13. Now, this is based on the staff recs and the agenda, but to simplify it, you start at the top. You could decide that all RHAs are withdrawn, in which case the option would be 4A and there would be no RHAs as a consequence to protect heritage. If you don't want to withdraw all RHAs, you'd move down to the next box to continue with RHAs unchanged. If you decided on that, that would require acceptance of option 4D. If you don't agree with that, you move down to consider the next box, which is to continue with RHAs but with changes to the rules. If you consider that to be an appropriate option, then 4B is the preferred. You may then, if you don't think there's changes to the rules, then you move down to 4C of a shorter list of RHAs, a selection, which could be only to continue with those outside Policy 3 or an alternative that councillors may have. And then as a consequence of 4C, you could continue with that list without changes to the rules, or alternatively a combination of 4B and 4C. Now, just as an update, what I've talked through is in the context of the recommendations in the agenda. There's been some simplification, as I mentioned before, of the recommendations, and in that context, there's a proposed recommendation being put to you, which is effectively 4B, which you'll be asked to vote on, of changes to the rules to refine what is being put forward and to continue with on Plan Change 13. And or you could also decide on that as well as, or as an alternative to limit the areas that you continue with. So you withdraw some of the RHAs, 2 of the RHAs, as shown on the screen, the Heaton Street and Pico Shands RHAs, and continue with the balance. So just with reference to what's on the screen now, I'll just briefly talk you through that. So there are effectively 2 sub-options now. One is the first one for you to decide on is, do you want changes to the rules that apply to RHAs and to refine the approach to be less restrictive but still have RHAs with rules in place? And or B, that you withdraw some aspects of the RHAs in Plan Change 13, but not all RHAs. And in terms of B, it's focused on Heaton Street and Pico Shand RHAs. That's 2 of the RHAs you decided on the 2nd of December. And secondly, the Blue Cottage be removed from the Inner City West RHA. And then sub-clause 3 is really a consequence of those 2 former sub-clauses. Now, just for context, that revised recommendation reflects what we've heard from councillors.
Right. So, have we got any... Oh, Tyler had a question, sorry. Yes.
Kia ora, team. Just for clarity's purpose, I just wanted to refer to the buildings and just confirm that Antonio Hall is
You did
gone?
that last week, didn't we?
It's already been considered and decided. Yes.
That's done and dusted, so you don't need to do that as part of Plan Change 13.
Great. And the next question is around the Gazette notice for 372 Riccarton Road, which is the proposed pocket park. There's something there in regards to the old war memorial site. The library, sorry.
That's more of a property matter. I know your specific concern. We're getting a response to you, but there is nothing to be concerned about.
That's great. Awesome.
Now, I'm happy to move this, and Jake's happy to second it with this new stuff. And thank you for everyone for all the input. We had a little meeting pop in yesterday, and out of it popped this. So I think it's very good. Everyone's got together and come out with a good solution for everyone. So if there's any more questions, Yanni?
In terms of decision making, in terms of PC13, who makes the decisions? Like, is it the independent hearing panel as well, or is it us?
So Plan Change 13 is still to be heard, and the panel or the commissioner that hears Plan Change 13 is yet to be determined. It may not be. Well, we've got that decision to make of who is the panel, and it need not be the same panel that is decided on Plan Change 14.
Would it have elected members on it?
That's an option which you could consider. Ultimately, after the panel's made recommendations, it will come back to council for a decision, and is, I must emphasise, a standard Schedule 1 RMA process. So after council's decision, there'd then be rights of appeal to the Environment Court and High Court, unlike Plan Change 14. Yep. So the decision on who hears Plan Change 13 has not been decided nor considered, but we're happy to take any feedback at a future date on that.
But fundamentally, allowing option 4D to continue means that council retains a greater level of democracy and transparency over the plan change process as compared to PC14, which were independent appointed commissioners.
Ultimately, any panel, whether it's in the context of PC14 or, that the hearings panel on Plan Change 13 could include elected members, but it could also be independent. Any plan change that is heard, if it's before commissioners, they need to act objectively and independently of council and ultimately make a recommendation to council to make a decision. So it's the hearings panel that's appointed on Plan Change 13. If it's commissioners, then it has a degree of independence similar to the IHP on Plan Change 14.
Can I just add something to that there too? If council elected members want to be on the panel, they have to have had the RMA qualification as well.
Thanks, John.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And we've all got that? No. Okay. Tyler's got another question. And Mel?
Yeah. So with the recommendation that stands here, what we're doing, just for clarity's purpose, is we're keeping in place the RHAs as notified, aside from those areas which are defined in the recommendations.
So the effect of the revised recommendation 4 would be that we continue with RHAs in the context of Policy 3, in the context of Plan Change 13, with the exception of Heaton Street and Pico Shands RHAs, so those two, and the withdrawal of the Blue Cottage from the Inner City West RHA.
Great. And this may be for Act 2, you might know this, Mark, is once this is in place, Pico Shands could essentially will have no other restrictions on it, so we've taken the character area away from it and also the heritage provisions off it. Would that mean that it's okay to be able to be developed?
That would remove the character and heritage overlays. I can't recall any other constraint. There may be other overlays, but that removes the character and heritage overlays.
Thank you so much. Cheers.
Sweet. Good here. Melanie.
Can you explain 4A, like what the effect of that is?
So it's recognising the panel's recommendations on Plan Change 14 that there was some criticism on the merits and is proposing a refined approach to the rules. And I'll turn to Glenda in a moment to explain it more fully, but in simple terms, through Plan Change 14, you had RHAs over a group of houses, for instance, and in a high-density environment, there was also sites adjoining the RHA that were identified within the interface area, and there were some additional rules applying within those interface areas. Mm-hmm. The effect of this resolution would be to take away those interface areas, but it would also be some refinement of the rules. So changes to the rules that apply to development within an RHA.
Yeah, that's accurate. That resolution says built form rules, so they are the specific ones that we put into RHAs to kind of provide a slightly smaller building envelope, which would be more compatible with the heritage values of the area. So if we took all those out, as we effectively did for character areas, you'd not have either of those two elements, the interfaces or the specific built form rules. You just have the zone, but you would still need a consent to build a new building or modify or alter buildings that you can see from the street and to demolish. Oh, that's just the last demolition. There's only in respect of the two top categories of properties.
And what would be the disadvantage of not supporting 4A?
I think the interface was always a little bit marginal anyway, and in terms of the built form rules, you wouldn't have that kind of guidance for the consent applications, so it doesn't kind of set a bit of a level of development that would be considered acceptable. So you just back to the normal sort of zone rules in terms of built form, but on a restricted discretionary consent, you don't have to follow those. You can negotiate them downwards, as it were.
There's some further explanation in the report in paragraph 411
Okay.
around that option.
And with the blue cottage, because we already made a decision on that, didn't we? So,
So just as explanation, the council on the 18th of September made a decision to delist the blue cottage as a scheduled heritage item. Even with that decision, it was still within the inner city west residential heritage area, and under the rules for Plan Change 13, they took effect from notification. So if an application has been made for resource consent, and for anyone else that's applying for resource consent for demolition or alterations within the RHA, because those rules are in effect now, they trigger consent and it has to be assessed for a process. So descheduling of the blue cottage, the fact that it's still in an RHA triggered consent and didn't remove the heritage constraint to it.
Is that you right there, Mel? You're good? Okay. Right, no more questions. Any debate? Mark?
Thank you. I'll speak directly to the Yaldhurst Memorial Hall, which is one of the clauses there. Having spoken to the Yaldhurst Rural Residents Association late yesterday, they were happy to see it removed from the PC13. And the fact that we've got the resolution around the table to gift them that hall so they can get on and refurbish it. Their full intent is to do it in heritage lines anyway, and by removing it from PC13, hopefully that sort of takes away some of the restriction that would require potentially more expensive refurbishment. So they're more than happy to see it taken out. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more debate? No. So I'll put that motion for what you see up there, and thank you everyone for all that absolute mountain of work done on this. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Okay, so that's Yanni.
I just want to comment the blue cottage in 4A.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, you'll vote against 4A blue cottage.
B2. B1, 2.
Sorry, mate.
Can I just draw attention to the fact that 4A and B is an and all there?
Oh, sorry.
Confirm my understanding that the decision being made is to accept both, or just one or the other.
Okay.
So it's and, remove the or.
Yeah.
Do we have to do anything, Chris?
That's fine. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. Please just clarify the votes against. Councillor Johansson, you were against the whole thing. Was that? Yeah. Okay.
and Mel.
And sorry, and you were about, sorry, against 4A and
4B too.
And was there anyone else against?
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Just 4 for me, Megan. Sorry. Just against 4. That's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Right, so that's carried. Thank you very much. Right. Now, we'll move on to number 9.